Welcome to episode 86 of OTD, your daily dose of soccer history by 17 Lost Guy. It's January 25, 1890. Tonight in Seville, a group of young men meet in a cafe. They drink, they talk, and they do something that, in hindsight, feels inevitable. They form a football club. Not a sporting society, not a social circle, but a club dedicated to association football, the English rules game that is spreading across Europe now like a new language. And the date matters, because for most of the 20th century, Sevilla's birthday was said to be 1905, the year the club formally registered its statutes. They even celebrated a centenary in 2005 on that basis. But research of history never sleeps, and in 2014, it was discovered that the actual founding date was on this day, January 25 in 1890, Burns Night, the marking of the birthday of Scottish poet Robert Burns. So today's story is not only about the foundation of a club, it's about the rediscovery of a club and the way history, identity, rivalry, and European success all flow from one city, one river, and one astonishing correction of the record. And yes, the rivalry matters too, because Sevilla's greatest rival, Real Betis, is founded in 1907, in the early years when football is becoming a civic obsession in Seville. Today we explore how football arrived in Seville, who were the founding characters, and how did Sevilla and Betis form so close together? And why did Sevilla's date get moved more than a century later? And how did a club with one league title become, paradoxically, Europe's most reliable specialist in knockout survival? Late 19th century Seville is not a football city yet. It's a trading city with a substantial British expatriate presence connected to shipping, manufacturing, and industrial work. And in so many places on the continent, football arrives not first through Spanish schools or local federations, but through foreigners who already know the rules and want to exercise. The founding story is preserved in the Scottish newspaper, the Dundee Courier, dated March 17, 1890, and it reads like the birth certificate of Spanish football culture. A group of British residents, mainly Scots, as later tellings emphasize, meet to discuss forming an athletic association. But after, as the article puts it, a deal of talk, and because nothing has changed all the way to today, a limited consumption of beer, they form the Club de Football de Sevilla, and they make a crucial decision. They will play under association rules. And this is why Sevilla matters beyond trophies. Because not only is Sevilla one of the oldest clubs in Spain, they are often described as the oldest club in Spain devoted solely to football, not a broader recreation club, but a football club from birth. Now meet the founders, because this is a story of characters. Edward Farquharson Johnston, Scottish-born and Sevilla's first president. Hugh McCall, another Scot, elected the first captain. And Esaias White, secretary, and the man who helped turn an idea into a match. Because a club isn't real until it plays. And that brings us to the first match. On March 8, 1890, Sevilla played Huelva Recreation Club at the Tablada racecourse. Sevilla win 2-0, a match widely referenced as the first official football match played in Spain under English FA rules, and Sevilla become the first winners in organized Spanish football history. And here's where the foundation date mystery begins to make sense, because clubs don't always leave neat paperwork. Sevilla were formed in 1890, but no one seemingly thought to register the Articles of Association until 15 years later, on October 14, 1905. For decades, that 1905 date became the official public anniversary, and which is why Sevilla celebrated a centenary in 2005. Then in 2014, after the discovery of evidence showing the earlier formation, with Johnston, White, and McCall as the core figures, the club changed the official founding date to January 25, 1890. That one administrative correction does something culturally explosive. It doesn't just move a date, it moves identity. It turns Sevilla into a club born on Burns Night, with a Scottish origin story written into Spanish football's opening chapter. Now the rival. The Betis are founded on September 12, 1907, a few years after Sevilla's formal 1905 registration, and in the moment when football in Seville starts to split into institutions, tribes, and neighborhoods. Even the names tell you the era. Balompié is the Spanish literal translation of football. Real arrives later as a royal patronage in 1914. And so the Seville Derby becomes one of Spanish football's defining local rivalries, not simply about points, but about belonging. Where Sevilla had proud Scottish roots to the point of being called football club from its beginning, Betis Balompié clearly signaled local roots. Once you know about Sevilla's connections to Burns Night, that detail becomes crystal clear. And there's a lovely piece of irony we can use to connect the founding story to the rivalry. At Sevilla's modern home, the Ramon Sanchez Pizjuan, the first official match played in the stadium was, coincidentally, Sevilla versus Betis, and Sevilla lost 2-4. The ground is named after Sevilla's club president for 17 years and a key promoter of the stadium that carries his name. And the architect who won the design competition was Manuel Muñoz Monasterio, who is also associated with the Santiago Bernabeu in Madrid. The Ramon Sanchez Pizjuan Stadium becomes its own character in the Sevilla story. It hosted the European Cup final in 1986, Steaua Bucharest versus Barcelona, and the Romanian side won it on penalties. In itself a wonderful story, which we'll do an episode on in a few months. The stadium exterior carries commemorative mosaics, including one for the infamous 1982 World Cup semi-final between France and West Germany, a match that was also decided on penalties, and worthy of an OTD episode surely. And then another installed in 2005, back when they thought it was the centenary year. And no kidding, the stadium also hosted the 2022 Europa League final between Eintracht Frankfurt and Rangers. And guess how that final was decided? On penalties, of course. Before kickoff, the fans sing a centenary anthem, a detail that becomes important later. Sevilla became the most successful club in Andalusia by titles, but for much of the 20th century, the story is more sporadic domestic glory than permanent Spanish dominance. They win the Spanish Cup in the 1930s, they then land the ultimate domestic prize in 1945-46, Sevilla's only La Liga title to date. They add cup wins across eras, and they become what many clubs become outside the Big Two, an institution that endures, fights, produces great players, and periodically builds teams capable of spiking into greatness. And Sevilla have had characters, always. First the president, whose name becomes the stadium. Then a cult winger from the Gambia, Biri Biri, who arrives in the 1970s and becomes so beloved that a supporter group later takes his name. And a story twist that feels designed for a Derby scriptwriter, because Biri Biri was set to join Betis before Sevilla convinced him to sign red and white instead. Then there's Maradona. In 1992-93, Diego signs for Sevilla from Napoli, a headline that sounds like a fantasy draft. It doesn't become a trophy story, but becomes part of Sevilla's cultural mythology, one of the greatest ever, passing through. But Sevilla's defining modern identity arrives in the 21st century, and it is European, because this club becomes a stranger superpower in football, not a league machine, but a knockout machine. They win the UEFA Cup in 2006 and 07. Then, in the Europa League era, they do something no one else has ever made look repeatable. They win it 3 consecutive times, 2014, 15, and 16. And they add 2020 and 2023. And UEFA states it cleanly. Sevilla have won the Europa League a record 7 times, and in 2023, they won their 7th final out of 7. That's not just a trophy count, that's a psychological identity. Sevilla become the club that knows how to survive 2 legs, bad nights, penalties, momentum swings, and pressure. That they become the Europa League's house team. And now add the cultural layer. Sevilla fans are known as Los Palanganas, a nickname born from rival supporters joking that the kids' red trim make the shirts look like the white bowls with red rims common at the time. And there's the 2 anthems phenomenon, the official club song from 1983, and then that centenary anthem by El Arrebato, which is sung so widely that it functions like a second official anthem. So to describe where Sevilla sit today, the answer is distinctive. Domestically, they live in a league dominated by economic giants, but in Europe, especially in the tournament built for clubs just below the super club tier, Sevilla have become a reference point, a club that turns recruitment and coherence into trophies, and turns the stadium into a pressure chamber. So what should we take away from January 25, 1890? Well, as always, 3 points. First, history is not fixed, it's proven. Sevilla's foundation, before the foundation, is a reminder that clubs aren't only built on trophies, they're built on archives, evidence, and the courage to correct record, even if it rewrites your identity. Second, football's roots are often cross-border. Sevilla begins as a Burns Night project by British expatriates, mainly Scots, and becomes a Spanish institution. The game migrates before it professionalizes. And third, you don't need to be a league empire to be a European empire. Sevilla's record 7 Europa League titles prove that a club can choose a tournament, master its psychology, and turn it into a permanent crown. On this day in 1890, Sevilla FC were formed on a poet's birthday, and the punchline is perfect. They started as a club founded by Scots who loved words, and became a club that writes its best lines in knockout football. That's all for episode 86 of OTD, your daily dose of soccer history by 17 Laws Guy. If you got an idea to an episode on the show, email me at otd@17lawsguy.com. And please rate the show 5 stars, subscribe and tell a friend. That's how we beat the algorithm together. Tomorrow, in episode 87, AFCON 1992, and the penalty shootout that was necessary to decide Ivory Coast's first crown. See you then.